welcome to another week of Tailrace, and we've got Anne back here, or I should say for the first time, because the other time sadly got lost.
That's right, yes.
It was so good that it disappeared into the nether regions of the internet,
Technology.
never to be
You
resurfaced.
can't rely on it, can you?
Can't rely on it at all, no.
Rumour has it that it was just so good the world couldn't handle it.
All right,
Yeah.
yes, I like that idea.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. So we're here to have a conversation because we've been trying to unpack what love might look like in our world, because we all care deeply about this thing, but it's really difficult to try and figure it out. So we've been unpacking what these different statements that Jesus made look like in our day-to-day lives. So I think we were talking about murder, about anger and about hatred, about contempt. So I might just read out this little bit of scripture from Matthew 5 from 21 onwards, and then I'll throw to you guys, and I'd love to hear what your first reactions to this little bit are. So Jesus makes this statement. He says, "You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, 'Raca,' is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fires of hell." Pretty radical statement. Like, what are your first observations there?
Well, I think he's talking about the danger of anger and how we can categorise people's actions. But I think what he's saying is that words are powerful and they can damage us on the inside. So whilst we might not have committed murder, sometimes our words and our feelings and our the way we can express that can be as damaging. So our anger can be sticks and stones will break my bones, but words can never hurt me. That's not really true, is it?
No, I think it helps to understand what anger is, and if you understand something, you can handle it better. Anger's an emotion, a feeling, and like all the strong feelings, that's like the engine of the car, and the thoughts are what steer the car. Mm-hmm. So there is a difference between the feeling of anger and what causes it through our thinking and what we can do with our thoughts to harness it. There are three other basic deep feelings. They're joy, fear and sadness. And joy doesn't need we don't need to worry about that. But sadness, if you're sad, you need comfort. If you're fearful, you need information or protection. And if you're angry, initially you need space because you need time to tame the wild horses. It doesn't come immediately in most people. In most people, anger comes from, it's a sort of cover for hurt, fear and frustration. It comes from a feeling that you've been treated unfairly. You know, the person who murders is an obvious example of that. They usually are acting on an overwhelming feeling of, I've been treated unfairly by someone or something. And that's the thing you can question with your thoughts. You know, how fair is it that I'm overcharged for my jar of honey? Or how fair is it, you know, that people should consider my feelings before they do something? Because in most cases, people are just always getting their own needs met all the time, and they don't always realise that they're going to bump into your needs getting met. So you can handle feelings of anger by first of all getting space, and if it's anger's like a real energy. It's a fight or flight response.
Yeah,
It's a way of getting away from the saber-toothed tiger. It's built into us for our own good, our own protection. So you go out and mow the lawn or chop some wood or do the vacuum cleaning, or if there's none of that's available, kick the wall, get the anger out. And then when you have subsided that feeling, like prick the bubble, you can come and talk to someone about it. That's a really good way. I felt angry when, you know.
Yeah.
Did you realise that? I don't know if you understand, but when you said such and such, but you can't always do that straight off. And that's why people say, I couldn't help it. I just did it because, I couldn't help you actually can help.
Yeah.
what you do. We wouldn't be rational beings if we couldn't help what we say or do.
Yeah.
But it seems as though
Yeah.
we can't help it if we don't give ourselves time to think and correct that irrational belief that somebody did it just to annoy us or to be unfair. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, that's
Do you
good.
think it's
Yeah.
hard for people, though, to leave the feeling and get into that space of thinking?
Yes, it's very hard.
And
It
do you
takes a
think-
lifetime of hard work
Yeah.
sometimes.
So do you think the feeling becomes more of the habit rather than the thinking part? You know, like I feel, like most people can express when they feel angry, when they might feel rejected, betrayal, frustrated, all those kinds of things. But it's then switching from that, kind of going, that's not the end of the story. I then have to process what that was all about, which is like what I think Jesus is trying to get us to do, because he's trying to sort of say,
Yes.
you
Don't
know,
just attack, he's saying.
yeah.
Don't say rucker
Yeah.
or you idiot or don't just do that.
Yeah.
Think.
Yeah, because you can actually damage.
You can actually
You
damage.
can do
Yeah.
the damage as much as what you think you've been damaged.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good point, because so obviously Jesus was saying this to a crowd who had been brought up with the law, do not murder. And so that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But Jesus is taking it that step further. It's not just about the action, but it's about what's going on in the heart. Because if I were to say to you, I was really angry with you, and you'd be quite wounded by that.
Totally.
Do you know what I mean? Like there'd be something inside of you that would be upset by that. So there's something going
Yeah.
on that's about anger that's more than just if I actually act upon it. There's something with our thinking there too, isn't there?
Yeah.
That could be hurtful.
And I think it offers an opportunity to go deeper.
Yeah.
But you have to be mature to be able to get to that deep space.
You
Because you have to work
You may
it
not be
through.
mature, but you have to realise that it's your irrational belief about something that's making you angry. So every time you say you, that's a bit of a lie, really. You're not doing anything to me. It's the way I perceive
Yeah.
how
Sure.
you're behaving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's what I tell myself.
So we really need to take ownership in those moments. Whenever anger arises, even if a boundary has been crossed,
Yes.
one of the first questions needs to be introspective.
Yes, and think, what is it that I'm feeling? Is it hurt, fear, frustration? What's frustrating me? What do I think this person really should do such and such? Or, you know, is it fair to believe that? Did they know that they were taking my parking spot? And if they did, what does it matter? Often you have to reason with yourself. Yes, how important is it is a good question.
Yeah. That's
Because
good.
otherwise, you know, people do get into a habit of being angry all the time. And they just go around like a little volcano, venting. And anybody who's there gets in the way.
Are some people, like some personality types, more prone to anger than others, or is it?
I don't think so. I think humans are prone to misreading situations and getting angry unreasonably.
Yeah.
Do you think that's to do with our need to control?
Yeah, I think it's our need to get everything done our way. Yeah, that's control. Yes.
So often we fire up on something and we're actually not God, but we kind of think we have the right to be God or
Yes, exactly.
whatever.
Yes.
I remember you once saying that there's no point, that one of the big lessons for you was learning what you could control and what you couldn't control,
Yes.
and what you couldn't control you just have to let go.
That's right. Yes, and I used to explain it to people as being like I think the analogy is with the top order batsman compared to the tail end bunny.
I love good cricket analogies.
Yes.
Continue.
I think it's so obvious, isn't it, that expert batsmen only hit two kinds of balls, ones they can score from or ones that they might get out to.
Yeah.
They hit them away.
Yeah. Tailenders swing at everything, don't they?
Tailenders try and hit everything and they just get out. Yeah.
I was always a tailender, and
Yes.
I've got to admit, I was a tailender. I'd always take these big swings at Dad's pies, try to knock it onto the beach.
Which means that the bowlers can get around your guard.
Yeah, it's very true. I kept getting out.
Which always puzzled me because bowlers are the ones who are tailenders and yet they don't seem to realise that they've got to get better at getting around them when another bowler goes.
Yeah, they're not real clued on, are they? Especially them fast bowlers. So I've got a question then. So it sounds like both of you have just been talking about boundaries. and how it's when a boundary gets crossed that we feel anger, or like a previous scar or baggage gets pressed upon, like a trigger point that we have anger. So if we are people that control boundaries well, what does that mean about our anger? Do we anger more often, more frequently because we know where the boundaries are, or do we are slower to anger because we've got better control in those spaces?
I think we practice behaving better as we get older. I know I've suggested it to other people to do. I don't know if I've done it very well myself, but you go through a process of thinking, well, what's the outcome I want? And this person's, yelling at me. What do I do? And you can disarm anger. You can prick their balloon, their angry balloon, by saying to them when they pause for breath, it sounds like you're really upset about this. You have to say it very sincerely, otherwise they'll just get worse. If you said, gee, you sound upset, that's not going to work. But you've got to take them seriously and say, feedback the feeling. It sounds like you're really upset about this, and it's been tough, hasn't it? If you can empathise with someone, you can disarm the anger, and it's amazing how quickly that anger calms down, because a lot of it's been vented anyway.
Yeah.
Yes. And you need to get to where you can talk about it. We've got a little script between a teenage girl and her mother. Do
you want to do that now?
Yeah, would that be a good idea?
Yeah. So I'm just going to open this up because we forgot to photocopy it. So Shaz is going to read from the computer
I'm
screen.
sorry, we didn't learn it.
Yeah, rude.
We didn't learn it. I'm sorry.
Can you read that, Shaz?
Yes, I can read that.
Oh.
Off you go, daughter.
You are so stupid. When will you try to understand me? Can't.
And treat me like an adult.
And treat me like an adult.
You're really angry, aren't you? I'm not sure what things you're talking about. Why can't we sit down and talk about it?
Talk about it? I'm not even sure you're smart enough for you to even understand a simple sentence. I mean, I want to stay out until 2 a.m. on Saturday.
Look, I want to talk about this, but I really can't think straight when you're screaming at me. Sit down and let's talk about it calmly.
I am calm.
I'm willing to talk about this if you'll sit down and stop screaming at me.
What if I don't want to stay?
Well, then let's talk about it later when you're not so angry. I want to get this settled, but only if you're not yelling at me.
I want to settle it right now.
Then please sit down and stop yelling so we can deal with it.
Okay, I'm sitting and I'm not yelling. I really would like to stay out late.
Keep going, you're doing well.
Next Saturday.
Saturday.
Yes, what we're doing there is the mother's sticking to her guns all the way through. She's pursuing an outcome, isn't she? She's saying, I want to do this with you, but not if you're yelling at me. And that's the negotiation. But what we usually do is we get caught up in the feeling and we start yelling back. And, words like idiot and stupid and you always and we let those things in. Feelings are very catching. That's the problem. They catch from one to another, particularly anger.
Yeah, okay.
And fear is very catching too. So we have to be on our guard against that. And I try to practice things like talking about my feelings instead of expressing them to someone. For instance, when I get angry with Colin, now he's a very nice person, but occasionally I do get angry with him. I plan how I'm going to speak to him about it, and I say something like, Colin, when you did so-and-so, well, I was trying to do such and such, and we sort of clashed with each other. It's more or less an analysis rather than an accusation. And you can learn to do that, and it feels better.
Do you think that it's because we all struggle to keep short accounts? So It's kind of like we have one episode and then there's another episode, and then before we know it, we've got a big bundle of yowies. And then when we actually start to talk about it, one yowie leads to another yowie, which leads to another yowie, which leads to another yowie.
Yep.
Whereas in that story, you kind of figured out that the daughter wanted to stay out late, and you could have bought into a whole heap of different conversations then, you know.
Stick to work out what outcome you want and just stick to that.
Yeah.
That's why men are often good at dealing with teenagers rather than women, because they're more logical in the way they pursue an outcome.
Yeah.
I'm not saying all men are, but many men are, because they often approach feelings through their thinking.
Yeah.
Which helps.
Yeah.
Something you said reminded me now. I've forgotten it again.
Well, it's just how you can end up with a big suitcase rather than dealing with one thing at a time.
One thing at a time.
Yeah, and sometimes I think that when marriages in particular are starting to break, that's where you do need help, because often there's a bag full of stuff rather than just one issue, and you need that third person to help you stick to that one issue, and then you deal with that issue, and then you deal with the next one and the next one. So you have to see, I think counselling sometimes is a long-term, not a short-term fix, whereas most people, they'll go to try a counsellor maybe once, twice, or they didn't help. But it's because they wanted the whole bag fixed, which might have taken 7-8 years to fill, and then they want somebody to unpack that in 2 sessions. It just doesn't work that way, does it?
It's not a case of untangling, really. It's a case of practising better communication techniques. And that's why I often have recommended to people that they do a short communication course like the one that LifeLink used to offer, but LifeLink doesn't do that anymore, unfortunately. I don't know who's going to take their place, because train at Lifeline is it's very expensive. Yes, what you're saying reminds me of something else, which is when it hurts, when it pinches, say ouch. If you tread on my toe, I'm likely to say, Shaz, you're steady on my toe, move off. But I don't if it's a feeling. If it's a feeling, I'll store it up and resent and simmer and poke it and prod it and feel it and feed it. What we need to learn to do with our friends, with people that matter to us, is just, when they hurt us, is to say, hey, that hurt. What did you say that for? Straight away, just as you would if it was a nudge or a treading on the toe. Because what that leads to, storing things up, is something horrible, really, 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 really bad, called passive aggression, which is when you bang things around and you say nothing when somebody says what's wrong, and you sulk. And that means that you've been sitting on something for far too long.
And Dr. Campbell, he says that that's the worst kind of anger out of all of them. The passive aggression, and that's what's underlying a lot of suicide, a lot of drug, alcohol addiction, a lot of our acting out kind of behaviours, that it's actual passive aggression. Because as a child, we often say to children, don't you talk to me like that, or don't you behave that way. Well, a child only has its non-verbals and its behaviour to communicate, and so then they learn to stuff it, rather than we're not training the children how to express anger. And then as adults, they have all this stuff that's just been stuffed down. And they've never learnt the skill of anger.
No.
And passive
most people haven't
awful.
learned any communication skills. It's not taught in schools, and it's not modelled at home very often, because we model on our parents. And I don't know about you, but my mother was a classic stuffer. I mean, I'd invite someone home after school, and if she didn't like them, the next day she'd be banging the broom around and looking like thunder. And she would never confess. Well, I didn't ask her then either. But she would never come straight out and say, tell me about this person.
Yeah.
She'd just express it in that passive, aggressive way.
Yeah.
And so I had to unlearn a lot of bad habits too.
How do you broach it with somebody that's being passive aggressive? Do you know what I mean? Is it just
you
name it up?
Describe the behaviour. You say,
So they're sulking. They're trying to send messages, but
watch
you're
out
not
for
really.
your words. Yes,
Yeah.
you say, you haven't
Erica.
spoken.
I'm kidding.
Erica, you haven't spoken to me since breakfast, and you look a bit sad. I wonder if there's something bothering you. Is it something I've done?
Yeah, but how do you do that when people aren't mature enough to have the conversation?
Well, you've got to do the mature bit of it. So they say, yes, I'm angry.
Yeah.
And then you've got to prick the balloon and
Yeah.
be empathetic and say, well, I can quite see that, that would upset you. It would upset me if it happened to me. But that's not what I meant to do,
Yeah.
I think that's about boundaries, though, don't you think? Like, I think Brené Brown says the most loving people in the world are people who have strong boundaries. So I think even if the other person doesn't understand or accept what you're doing, I think to offer them the gift of a mature conversation, a mature boundary, a healthy boundary, even if they reject you and reject the thing, you've still offered them the best love possible. Whereas I think if we never offer health, then we're not ever offering them true love, I don't think.
That's good.
Do you mean
you
you
understand what I
can
mean?
teach them to not be passive aggressive, or what?
I'm just saying that in the situation, so Jono's talking about somebody who's passive aggressive, who might be too immature to hear or to have a conversation about their behaviour. And I'm just saying that I don't think it's loving not to have the conversation, because I actually think that by offering. So when you offer that conversation, you're putting a boundary down on the passivity, and you're kind of saying enough's enough. You're better than this. There's more in you than behaving this way. So we're going to try and tackle and have a mature conversation. That person may or may not receive that conversation well, no matter how hard you try.
That's right.
But you've still offered them love, and you've offered them the best bit of love.
What we're getting into now is assertiveness. And assertiveness is always a good thing to have, even though it hurts a bit to begin with.
That's good.
If somebody's trying to bully you, for instance, often you have to reply assertively to them.
Yeah.
You have to decide what the outcome is you want, and you have to stick to it with them so that they know they can't push you around. Now, that requires a good self-confidence. It means that you have to approve of yourself enough to be assertive. Sometimes people have to work very hard on that.
And it's practice again.
And it's
you
practice
have to
again.
practice.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Well, I know you may want me to do this, but it doesn't suit me.
Yeah.
And saying no, I've had to learn to say no.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for asking me, but no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And that's assertive.
Yeah.
Well, it may not be assertive to you, Jono, but it is for me.
Assertiveness is something you can learn and grow in, though, isn't it?
Yes.
Because I'm just thinking about this conversation about passive aggression, and I think it's really important because it's so toxic.
Yes.
And people stay in a really unhealthy space, and it's not good for them to do so. But it's easy for us to talk about this, but I know that many people listening or watching to this later on, they're going to think, yeah, that's great. And then I know that they're going to get to small group on Tuesday night or Wednesday night, or they're going to go to work, or do you know what I mean? And they're going to be presented with an opportunity to be assertive and address that issue, that toxicity, and people won't.
They'll wimp out.
Yeah, but assertiveness is something we can grow in, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
You do it little by little by little.
Yeah. And the first bit's the hardest bit, isn't it?
It is. It's very hard, yes.
Yeah. Once you've
So
said...
I don't think I started to be assertive until I was older than 40.
Yeah. Wow.
Because I'd been skating through life, somehow getting through it.
Yeah.
Without doing anything non-toxic. I was doing a lot of toxic things. But once I started to learn about being responsible for myself and learning to approve of myself, that changed everything.
But if you love me, you won't allow me to stay in that space without a conversation.
No, without a conversation.
At some stage, you're going to say, Jono, I care for you enough that I don't want you to stay in that toxic space any longer. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's deal with the infection.
Yep.
That's what love would require of you.
Yeah. It's easier if I were your counsellor rather than your mother, by the way.
Yeah.
It's very difficult when you have complicated links to somebody.
Yeah.
Just to speak to them, to deal with them clearly.
Yeah.
I'm just reading a book at the moment by Jean Kitson about how to deal with elderly parents. My daughter bought it and she gave it to me to read first. And the first thing that she says is, you mustn't do things to your parents, you do things with your parents. So the first people to be included in any meeting are the parents and their wishes. And, the people forget it, even a simple thing like that. You plan something and then you find out that Mum and Dad don't want to live in the granny flat anyway. I'd rather go to Queensland.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then everybody's feelings get hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just because we don't check things out with other people. You always have to do that. It's a bit like, so if you were blind, you would check out where everything is, where you're going, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But we don't check out with our loved ones or with people that we know how our actions and words are affecting them.
It's a great analogy of that. I hadn't thought of it like that.
I know.
That's really good.
When Jono was engaged to Erica, I remember having a conversation with Erica which went like, I've never been a mother-in-law before. This is really new to me. You need to tell me when I hurt you or when I muck up, because I don't understand all the family that you're coming from, and then we've got our family system, but now we're melding it into a different family system. So if I tread on your toes, I won't know unless you tell me. So you need to tell me, because I don't want those mother-in-law jokes behind my back.
Yes.
But I think having had that conversation, it gives permission for all sorts of other conversations to happen. So it doesn't mean that the conversations will be easy. It just means that you've given permission for them to happen.
Yes, and you've given a different point of view.
Yeah.
What generally people do is they just keep ploughing on until they stuff up royally, and then the daughter-in-law is going to be furious.
Yeah.
They might book the wedding reception at the local pub at Whoop Whoop.
Yeah.
And say, well, this is what my family want.
Yeah.
And daughter-in-law, that's what happens.
It's in every situation, isn't
Yes,
it?
it is.
That's what we do.
Checking out,
Yeah.
consulting,
Yeah.
negotiating.
It's really good. I've got another question for you guys though. So as I'm reading this, I've heard it said that this part of what Jesus was talking about wasn't just anger, but he was also talking about anger and contempt. Because in this little story or few statements that he says here, it doesn't say anything about what the person did to be called Raka. Do you know what I mean? Like what trigger point or boundary he'd crossed or anything like that. So Jesus is also talking about this, about how the murderer, without committing murder, is harbouring this contempt or this anger or this hatred within his heart, and that's a big part of what Jesus is talking about here. Do you guys have any insight into that? Like, am I right in reading it that way, or is that?
Yeah, the worst anger is contempt.
Yeah.
You can tell when a marriage is going to fall apart and probably will never ever be savable, is if there's contempt in there from one partner to another. Contempt is congealed anger. It's something that's been thought over and over and over, and it's kind of set in concrete.
Wow.
It's horrible. It's a horrible thing. One of the writers calls it the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, when you hear them thundering along, and it's mostly contempt. Contempt and rudeness to the other person, because you just don't care anymore.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
You don't meet it very often, but sometimes you meet it in society. Think of racism.
Yeah.
And that's generalised contempt.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
Sexism, same thing.
Yeah.
Contempt. Because you feel as though somebody's lower than you.
That's it, isn't it?
Less.
Yeah. You're taking the dignity out of them in some ways, aren't you?
That's right. Yeah. You feel superior to them.
Yeah.
And it's hard to transform,
It is.
isn't it? Because it's so
Set.
congealed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, that's good.
But it's so devastating to the soul. Like even just, sticking the middle finger up at someone is a sign of contempt. It's one of those early symptoms. It's painful. It can be really painful at times.
Sarcasm is a form of contempt. When people excuse a cruel comment by saying, "Oh, it's just being sarcastic." But so if both people aren't laughing, it's not funny.
No.
There's a lot of truths told in jokes, aren't there?
Yes,
And they go, "Oh, it's just a joke."
just a joke. That's a cop out to say, "Oh, it's just a joke."
Yeah.
I often think sarcasm shows where there's been hurt. So underlying it is a hurt that's popping out
Yes.
in humour.
Because you remember I said defined anger as being a feeling that you've been treated unfairly.
Yeah.
This is your way of getting back.
Yeah.
Or you would think that.
Yeah.
Let's start to wrap up a little bit. Or first of all, is there anything else that you guys want to talk about, big topic-wise? Pretty comfortable. Can you guys please give some really practical application steps, summing up part of what we've spoken about today? Just put you on the spot.
Well, I think first of all, remember that you are in charge of your feelings, whether you believe it or not. Think before you act.
Yeah.
It doesn't go feel, act. It goes feel, think, act.
Yeah.
And plan ways of practicing non-lethal ways of dealing with other people's anger. Analyse your own anger and see whether you really are right in thinking that you've been treated unfairly, and then figure out a way to express that without abusing the other person. And be assertive.
Yeah. That's
Deal
good.
with it. Deal
Yeah.
with it.
Do
When
something.
it pinches, say ouch.
Yeah.
Deal with it
Yeah.
instead of passive-aggressive
Yeah.
behaviours.
Yeah. That's good. Do you have anything to add?
For me, it would be find wise people to talk to, not just people who will agree with you, but people who can help you understand why you're feeling what you're feeling, and then to help you strategise. So whether that be a counsellor, a pastor, a small group leader, somebody wise in your community, whatever community setting you're in. But sometimes I think we just need other people to hear why we're angry, and for them to then help us to understand what's driving that underneath, where the boundaries are broken. And
Where
I think
the
that's
feeling
the
of
power
unfairness
of
comes from.
community. I think that's the power of community. I think it is hard to do it on our own, especially if we're in the early stages. If we've never practiced it and we've never had it modelled, we have to have a community where it's safe to practice. And that's one of the things I love about Tailrace. It is safe to practice. You can be angry and be forgiven.
That's really good.
That's not going to be true in every community.
The other thing I love about Tailrace is that this really should be taught to children from the word go. If you feel something, say something, and an adult will help you process that. And that's what we teach young mums and dads to do with children. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. Well, Anne, thank you so much for joining us today.